Hello everyone, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. I hope you enjoy listening to books. Today, the book I'm going to interpret for you is called Socrates, A Man for Our Times. The author is the renowned British historian, Paul Johnson. When we think of Socrates, many of us likely have two impressions. Firstly, he was an extraordinary ancient Greek philosopher, credited with laying the groundwork for Western philosophy. His position in Western civilization is akin to Confucius' status in Eastern civilization. Secondly, he was an eccentric old man. How so? Well, this old man had a great hobby, debating with people on the streets. For instance, asking someone to define justice or courage and engaging in a debate that often left the other person speechless and embarrassed. This hobby of his led Socrates to offend nearly everyone in the city of Athens. Eventually, he was charged and sentenced to death by the Athenians. He chose to face his death calmly. His demise became a significant event in the history of Western thought. When I first heard this story, I couldn't quite understand it. It seems philosophers think differently than ordinary folks. Yes, they enjoy exploring abstract concepts like justice and courage and pursuing intellectual satisfaction, but why make life difficult for the rest of us? Why corner people in the streets, making them publicly embarrassed? How could people not resent him for that? Of course, sentencing Socrates to death was excessive due to this incident. But why didn't Socrates run away? At that time, he easily could have escaped. If he knew it was an unfair trial and had the means to flee, why sacrifice himself needlessly? This was my simple childhood confusion about the story. In the end, I could only draw one conclusion: philosophers operate on a different level, a height that us ordinary folks can't grasp. However, Paul Johnson's book seems to aim differently. The subtitle, A Man for Our Times, suggests that Socrates' ideas continue to provide us with spiritual strength even today. The cover of the book, depicting a faceless figure, hints that the true essence of Socrates has been obscured. If that's the case, the story we know of the argumentative old man who antagonized people and met a tragic end might not represent the whole truth. So, in today's session of listening to this book, let's follow its narrative and attempt to answer two fundamental questions. First, what kind of person was Socrates? Second, what really happened with Socrates' death? After addressing these questions, we'll discuss what value Socrates' ideas still hold for us today, according to the author. First, let's take a look at what kind of person Socrates was. To answer this question, we must go back over 2,000 years to ancient Greece. Around 470 BC, Socrates was born in a city-state called Athens in ancient Greece. In those times, Greece operated under a system of city-state politics, where each city was also an independent state. It's somewhat similar to present-day Singapore. During Socrates' birth, Athens was rapidly rising. By the time he reached adulthood, Athens had become the most powerful and wealthiest city-state in all of Greece. Athens' strength was remarkable. For instance, it managed to confront and defeat the massive Persian Empire, which spanned across Asia, Europe, and Africa, significantly larger than Athens. Athens proudly proclaimed itself as the school of Greece, deriving its confidence from leading in politics, economy, culture, and more. It was also the acknowledged leader among over 100 city-states. Athens was at the peak of its power, and this extreme strength instilled extreme confidence in its people. At that time, Athenians widely believed that with their intellect and capabilities, they could achieve anything. Prominent figures in Athens, like Pericles, expressed that humans weren't helpless victims of fate but masters of their own destiny. Notable elites like Protagoras asserted, man is the measure of all things. Today, these perspectives might seem overly confident, centered on human superiority. But back then, it challenged traditional Greek beliefs and the authority of the gods. It was within this societal climate that Socrates grew up, exposed to various unconventional thoughts. He encountered thoughts from natural philosophers, a group in Greece exploring alternative explanations for the universe and natural phenomena, often explained through mythology. They debated the origins of the world. Some claimed water, others fire or air, and even more abstractly, some said a tree. After studying with these philosophers for a while, Socrates deemed their teachings pseudo-knowledge. Their theories seemed bizarre and lacked verification or further progression, leading him to discontinue his studies with them. Socrates encountered a second set of thoughts from the sophists, or wise men. These individuals were skilled orators and debaters, teaching persuasive speaking techniques for high fees. Protagoras, who claimed, "Man is the measure of all things," was among these influential figures. The popularity of sophists surged in Athens due to the city's societal structure, where eloquent speakers had better chances of gaining political power. However, Socrates found fault with this group too. Many sophists lacked moral integrity. For instance, interpreting Protagoras' statement, "Man is the measure of all things," as an indication that nothing is certain, and individuals can manipulate truths for personal gain. Aristophanes, the father of Greek comedy, even wrote a play called Clouds, mocking these unscrupulous sophists. Interestingly, in this play, the main character was Socrates. Aristophanes mistakenly conflated Socrates with these sophists, but Socrates didn't take offense and remained unperturbed. In fact, he eventually became friends with Aristophanes. This era provided Socrates ample exposure to diverse and unconventional thoughts, shaping his own philosophical perspectives. Speaking of which, let's delve into Socrates' character. While he was known for his penchant for debating people on the streets, leading many to perceive him as stubborn and difficult, the reality was quite different. In his daily life, Socrates was incredibly easygoing and had a great sense of humor. He often engaged in self-deprecating humor, exuding a charming and witty personality. For instance, Socrates was famously considered unattractive, and someone once joked about his appearance, saying, "I admit your mouth is better than mine. Let's suppose that the gods gave us mouths to eat with. Yours is 3 times better at it." To which Socrates replied, "Indeed, my kisses are sweeter and softer than yours because my lips protrude and are fatter." Another time, when Socrates' wife displayed her temper by shouting and throwing a basin of dirty water at him, he responded calmly, saying, "Just as always, thunder follows lightning, and then comes rain." Regarding his penchant for debating people in public, while it's unlikely that he didn't upset anyone, he managed to avoid stirring up strong enmity. He conversed with humility, reason, and even warmth, rarely admonishing others and maintaining a composed demeanor. When others raised their voices in anger, he would lower his and speak calmly. Apart from his amiable nature, Socrates was known for his restraint. When asked how to make young people virtuous, he advised avoiding excess in all things. He didn't prioritize bodily pleasures but cared deeply for companionship. He aspired to be a teacher and observer of humanity from a young age, valuing sincere connections and attracting many young followers, including affluent youths. Moreover, Socrates was not just an intellectual, he had a warrior spirit. He fought several times to defend Athens, displaying admirable courage on the battlefield. In summary, Socrates was a person of impeccable character, high standing, and contributions to the city-state. However, the question arises, if Socrates was such an exemplary figure, why was he sentenced to death by the city-state? In the second part, when Socrates was sentenced to death, he was already a 70-year-old man. The Athenians charged him with 2 offenses, impiety and corrupting the youth. Strictly speaking, these charges weren't entirely baseless. Socrates indeed didn't adhere to the traditional Greek gods, and he often roamed the streets with young people. However, upon closer examination, these accusations seem dubious. Firstly, while Socrates didn't believe in traditional gods, he didn't openly oppose them. In fact, he respected the common people's beliefs in the traditional gods and saw no need to dismantle those ancient customs. Moreover, if impiety were such an unforgivable offense, how did Pericles, who glorified human centrism, become a prominent figure and the ruler of Athens? Secondly, accusing Socrates of corrupting the youth is even more unfounded. He mentored the youth without charging fees and didn't teach deceptive rhetoric. To claim that such an upright person corrupted the young is baseless. Furthermore, even if one were to assume that Socrates was guilty of impiety or corrupting the youth, why wait until he was 70 to prosecute him? Socrates maintained the same behaviors for the past 20 years. Why not charge him earlier if his actions were truly threatening? Clearly, the reasons behind Socrates' death sentence weren't straightforward. So, what's the truth behind Socrates' demise? To answer this, we must focus on an essential yet often overlooked aspect, the Athenian society, the backdrop of these events. As previously mentioned, during Socrates' adulthood, Athens entered its golden age. However, this period of immense prosperity and vigor often coincides with the most perilous times. The biggest danger in Athenian society was its overflowing confidence. They gradually believed they could control the entire Greek world, inviting hostility from Sparta, another powerful Greek state. Ultimately, a prolonged and destructive war broke out between Athens and Sparta, the Peloponnesian War. This conflict led Athens down an irreversible path to ruin, a process that coincided with the latter part of Socrates' life. Initially, Pericles died from a plague, and his supporters suffered heavy losses. His death was attributed to his disbelief in the gods. Subsequently, the city began purging the knowledge elite who promoted human centrism. As the war progressed, people became increasingly fanatical, altering their judgments drastically. Recklessness became bravery, caution turned into cowardice, tyranny became a symbol of manliness, and cunningness was now considered shrewdness. Thucydides, the historian, lamented that war, like a rough teacher, changed people's character. Finally, Athens faced a catastrophic defeat. After over 2 decades of fierce warfare, Sparta emerged victorious and established a puppet government in Athens. However, this regime didn't last long, and eventually, a new leadership reinstated the original Athenian system. Nevertheless, the Athenians' mindset had transformed significantly due to the tumultuous events, diverging greatly from their pre-war state. So, how did the Athenian mindset change? Firstly, there was disillusionment. Athens had experienced the defeats of war, Sparta's occupation, the bloody rule of a puppet government, and the subsequent civil war. This left them deeply despondent. Formerly confident and gentle, they now dwelled in bitterness and sorrow. Secondly, anger prevailed. Over recent years, most Athenian families had suffered violence, many lost fathers, brothers, or sons to killings. Consequently, an air of irreconcilable tension shrouded Athenian society. The courts were filled with angry and grieving litigants. Healing these wounds and fostering reconciliation became paramount for the new leaders. Hence, they enacted an amnesty law, hoping to cease endless prosecutions and reunite the fractured consensus. The intention was good, but many Athenians, who felt wronged, hoped for justice. When the amnesty law arrived, the accomplices of the former puppet government evaded charges and continued to live freely in the city. This situation was intolerable for them, and everyone sought an outlet for their emotions. Amid this atmosphere, people angrily questioned how their great city had fallen to its current state. They needed answers, even if those answers might not align with the truth. It's in this context that Socrates was thrust into the spotlight. But why Socrates? First, he hadn't engaged in the political activities of the puppet government, which deprived him of protection under the amnesty law. Secondly, Aristophanes' comedy, Clouds, portrayed Socrates as a sophist, which placed him in a precarious position. Athenians despised sophists, considering them godless and corrupters of the youth, teaching them deceitful tactics and inciting immature minds to engage in politics. In truth, many Athenians had only a vague understanding of Socrates. In a city of over 100,000 people, their perception of a local celebrity might be comparable to that in a small town today, mostly hearsay and speculation. Unfortunately, thanks to Aristophanes, Socrates partially acquired the image of a sophist in Athenians' shared rumors. However, the book conjectures that what truly sealed Socrates' guilty verdict was another, more damning reason, one that made his exoneration nearly impossible. What was this reason? Socrates had close associations with 2 individuals, Alcibiades and Critias. In the eyes of Athenians at that time, any connection with these 2 was incriminating. These 2 men were intensely hated by Athenians and, unfortunately, were already deceased, so there was no vengeance to be had. Who were they? Alcibiades was a traitor responsible for Athens' downfall, 20 years younger than Socrates, an ardent fan who flaunted his association with Socrates. Socrates attempted to guide him onto the right path but failed. Alcibiades, handsome, wealthy, and narcissistic, had significant influence in Athens and betrayed the city to Sparta, then flitted between Athens, Sparta, and Persia, ultimately being assassinated. Critias, related to Plato and thus having a connection to Socrates, 9 years younger than Socrates, had a decent relationship with him initially. He later became the head of the puppet government and engaged in extreme actions, dying in the civil war. Athenians believed these two connections confirmed Socrates' image from clouds, irreligious and immoral, spreading evil throughout the city, leading to the creation of two great evildoers and ultimately causing the city's tragedy. Socrates was unjustly scapegoated under the collective frenzy of Athenian emotions. Part 3. By this time, Socrates still had hope of surviving. Firstly, given his debating skills, he could have potentially defended himself in court, at least to convince the jury that his crimes didn't warrant death. Although there was collective hysteria in Athens at that time, each person's perception of Socrates varied. Among the jurors were sympathetic individuals and those open to persuasion. Secondly, even after being sentenced to death, Socrates had a chance to escape Athens before his execution, with a high likelihood of success. So, why didn't he seize these opportunities? The book suggests it was due to Socrates' stubborn pride. This pride deterred him from using lies to defend himself or escaping imprisonment. However, this pride shouldn't be seen as irrational, instead, it was a deliberate choice. To understand this, we need to revisit the fundamental question: why did Socrates engage people in argumentative discussions on the streets? He was tired of natural philosophers' endless debates on the origins of the world. Socrates shifted his interest to humanity, engaging various people from sailors and farmers to cobblers and scribes, curious about everything regarding human nature. He discovered his skill in questioning, leading from obvious queries to complex ones about beliefs, morals, and opinions, often inciting thoughtful responses. He enjoyed this immensely, feeling it was his life's work. While his conversational style seemed argumentative, Socrates was merely questioning the obvious, believing that truth was rarely apparent. He felt ignorant himself and believed that this ignorance drove him to explore and reflect continuously. So, when a friend told him the oracle claimed no one was wiser than Socrates, he was perplexed. Feeling unaware of significant things, he concluded the oracle must have meant his acknowledgement of his ignorance. Socrates had observed many who thought themselves knowledgeable but were not. He had listened to Athenian politicians' speeches, realizing their pursuit was persuasion, not truth. They sounded convincing, but were they truthful? Not necessarily. The sophists' influence wrapped Athenians in a cloak of seemingly credible but potentially false information, leading them astray. As a citizen who grew up in Athens and fought for the city, Socrates deeply loved both the city and its people. He compared himself to a gadfly biting the state like a horse, aiming to awaken it from complacency or stupor. He didn't think he could impart wisdom since he saw himself as ignorant. But he could share a method of thought, using questioning to help people birth their wisdom, akin to a midwife aiding childbirth. Socrates was optimistic about human nature, believing most didn't willingly choose evil. Ignorance or misguidance led them astray. No one would claim to be immoral or unjust knowingly, they merely lacked an understanding of virtue and justice. Hence, Socrates tirelessly discussed virtue, stimulating reflection through questioning. His famous saying was, "An unexamined life is not worth living." His values and sense of purpose led him to refuse defending himself by saying what people wanted to hear. Although he could have, purely for acquittal, professed allegiance to Athens' traditional gods or claimed to teach accepted moral principles. But these weren't factual. He didn't teach morals, he simply helped people think independently. He could have compromised to save his life, but at the cost of misrepresenting his life's work. Hence, he persisted in speaking the truth, basing his defense on honesty. Sadly, Athenians didn't accept his truth and were even further provoked. Consequently, Socrates received a death sentence. His choice not to escape had similar reasons. Beyond upholding procedural justice, his resilient attitude aimed to awaken people eventually, fulfilling his life's purpose. In the end, Socrates died by drinking poison, accompanied by friends and students. Interestingly, facing death, he remained composed. As his friends wept uncontrollably, he calmly addressed them, stating that such behavior was improper and encouraged a peaceful and brave prayer. His last words were a joke, suggesting offering a rooster to Asclepius, the legendary god of medicine, thanking him for transitioning from a troubled life to a peaceful death. Indeed, this playful old man, right before his death, left everyone with a joke. With a smile, he departed from this world. Here we are, that concludes our journey through this book about Socrates. Throughout this book, the author repeatedly quotes Cicero's line, "Socrates was the first to call philosophy down from the heavens and establish it in cities, and even introduce it into homes, and compel it to inquire about life and morals, good and evil." In other words, Socrates' philosophy isn't detached from the public or the everyday. On the contrary, it touches on the lives of ordinary people. He doesn't reside solely in classrooms or academic pursuits but exists within the practicalities of our daily lives. It's this aspect that allows Socrates' ideas to transcend time and inspire people across different eras to reflect upon and examine their own lives. Of course, our present world is vastly different from ancient Greece over 2,000 years ago. However, certain issues like arrogance, biased beliefs, and moral confusion still trouble many today. In the face of these problems, Socrates had already recommended a way of life to overcome them more than 2,000 years ago. I believe if Socrates were alive today, he would likely use his distinctive questioning technique to make us aware of our ignorance and help us unearth the biases that inadvertently dwell in our minds. Ultimately, he would urge us to contemplate further on what constitutes genuine knowledge, virtuous behavior, and the best possible state of being true to our nature. Alright, that covers all that I wanted to share with you. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you all for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom with practice to achieve our financial goals and create a better future. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.